Welcome to a timeless classic from the 1960 World Chess Championship, featuring the patriarch Mikhail Botvinnik against the magician from Riga, Mikhail Tal. This game, a Benoni defense, Ullmann variation, showcases a fascinating clash of styles. Tal, known for his attacking prowess, takes on Botvinnik's strategic depth. Who will prevail in this epic encounter? Let's dive in. The game opens with Botvinnik's d4, a classic queen's pawn opening, setting the stage for a strategic battle. Tal responds with nf6, developing his knight and controlling the center, a common and flexible choice. Botvinnik pushes c4, challenging Tal's control of the d5 square and preparing to build a strong center. Tal immediately strikes back with c5, declaring his intentions for a Benoni defense, a sharp and often tactical opening he favored. Botvinnik advances with d5, establishing a space advantage in the center and locking up the position. Tal plays e6, challenging Botvinnik's central pawn and preparing to open lines for his pieces. Botvinnik develops his knight to nc3, reinforcing his central pawn and preparing to castle. Tal responds by capturing with exd5. An alternative here for Tal could have been nxd5, fixing the pawn structure but allowing White's knight to remain active. Botvinnik recaptures with cxd5, maintaining his central presence. Had Tal played g6 here, a common Benoni setup might follow with nf3 and bg7, leading to a kingside fianchetto. Tal plays d6, solidifying his central pawn structure and creating a strong anchor for his pieces. Botvinnik develops his king's knight to nf3, pushing e4 right away could have offered some immediate counterplay, but Botvinnik opts for solid development. Tal continues his plan with g6, preparing to fianchetto his dark-squared bishop. Botvinnik develops his bishop to bg5, pinning Tal's knight to the queen. Tal fianchettos his bishop to bg7, completing his kingside development and adding pressure to the center. Botvinnik reroutes his knight to nd2, preparing to bring it to a more active square or support a central advance. Tal plays h6, challenging Botvinnik's pinned bishop and forcing a decision. Botvinnik's bishop retreats to bh4, maintaining the pin on the knight. Tal pushes g5, aggressively driving the bishop back further and gaining space on the kingside. Botvinnik's bishop retreats to bg3. Another option could have been a6, followed by a4 and nh5, potentially leading to a more complex kingside fight. Tal plays nh5, immediately targeting that dark-squared bishop, which he views as a major threat. A more complicated line could have involved qa4+ followed by kf8 and qb3. Botvinnik develops his knight to nc4, keeping the position quiet and flexible, a hallmark of his style. Tal takes the bishop with nxg3, completing the exchange and creating an open h-file for White. Botvinnik recaptures with hxg3. Capturing with bxc3+ followed by bxc3 and b5 would have led to a different pawn structure on the queenside. Tal castles kingside with 0-0. The open h-file isn't as threatening as it might seem, as the rest of White's army is out of position. Trying n4 to attack the d6 pawn wouldn't work, as White could respond with b5 and ncxd6. Botvinnik plays e3, strengthening his central pawn and preparing to develop his light-squared bishop. Tal brings his queen to qe7, connecting his rooks and preparing to activate his pieces. Botvinnik develops his bishop to bd3, a solid square where it eyes Tal's kingside. Tal's rd8 adds more pressure to the d-file, a key central artery. Botvinnik castles kingside with 0-0, bringing his king to safety and connecting his rooks. Tal plays nd7, rerouting his knight and preparing to put pressure on White's center. Botvinnik expands on the queenside with a4, aiming to create weaknesses in Tal's position. Tal plays n5, offering a knight trade in the center and simplifying the position. Botvinnik accepts the exchange with nex5. Tal recaptures with c5. Interestingly, Tal himself later felt this was a mistake, as it blocked his bishop's path, but engine analysis suggests it was indeed the best move in the position. Botvinnik pushes a5, continuing his queenside expansion and creating a passed pawn. Tal brings his rook to rb8, defending the b-pawn and preparing to counter Botvinnik's queenside play. Botvinnik plays ra2. A very strong move that brilliantly blunts the a1, h8 black battery, a key tactical idea here. Tal develops his bishop to bd7, connecting his rooks and preparing to bring it to a more active square. Trying bb5 to exchange the bad bishop would lead to qe8 followed by qd3. Botvinnik brings his knight to nb5, putting pressure on Tal's queenside. A line involving a6, na3, and b5 would have offered different strategic considerations. Tal captures the knight with bxb5, simplifying the position and removing a dangerous piece. Botvinnik recaptures with bxb5. At this moment, Tal offered a draw. However, Botvinnik, ever the competitor, asked him to make the next move before accepting. An alternative for white here was a6, followed by bc4 and b5. Tal plays b6. A crucial mistake, made after Botvinnik declined the immediate draw offer. This move weakens the queenside. Botvinnik immediately pounces with a6, exploiting Tal's previous mistake and securing a powerful passed pawn. Tal brings his rook to rdc8, defending the c-file and trying to contain Botvinnik's queenside pawn. Botvinnik develops his queen to qd3, eyeing Tal's kingside and preparing to bring more pieces into play. Tal's rc7 adds another defender to the 7th rank, trying to prevent any rook infiltration. Botvinnik plays b3, preparing to support his queenside pawns and open lines for his pieces. Tal plays qc3, inviting a queen trade and simplifying the position, which might ease the pressure. Botvinnik accepts the queen trade with qxc3, moving into an endgame where his passed a-pawn could be decisive. Tal recaptures with bxc3, bringing his bishop to a more active square. Botvinnik plays rc2, centralizing his rook and preparing to defend his pawns. Developing the bishop to bg7 would have enabled more plans for white. Tal reroutes his bishop to bf6, aiming for a more active square and putting pressure on white's pawns. Botvinnik pushes g4, expanding on the kingside and creating a pawn storm. Tal brings his rook to e7, defending the 7th rank and preparing to activate his rook. Botvinnik brings his rook to rc4, eyeing Tal's queenside and preparing to support his passed pawn. Black's position is becoming increasingly unpleasant here, with no clear active plans. White could potentially push f4 or undermine the queenside, but these options are weak and would give white other advantages. Tal moves his rook to rc8, preventing Botvinnik from playing b4, which would open the queenside further. Had Tal played b4, rec7 and rfc1 would follow for white. Botvinnik plays g3, consolidating his kingside pawns and preparing for further advances. Tal moves his bishop to bg7, bringing it back to a safer and more active square. Botvinnik plays rd1, centralizing his rook and preparing to support his pawns. Tal brings his rook to rf8, defending his back rank and preparing to activate his rook. Had he played b4 here, it might have sufficed to infiltrate, but Botvinnik was worried about f4. Botvinnik moves his rook to rd3, believing he has all the time in the world to improve his position. Tal moves his king to kh7, bringing it to safety and preparing for kingside action. Botvinnik brings his king to kg2, centralizing it and preparing to support his pawns. Tal advances his king to kg6, gaining space on the kingside. A more aggressive f4 would have been met by h5, leading to f5+. Botvinnik brings his rook back to rd1. His previous plan failed, and he now attempts to reroute his b6 bishop. Tal pushes h5, opening up the kingside and creating some space for his pieces. Botvinnik captures with gxh5+, opening the g-file for his rook. Tal recaptures with kxh5, gaining space on the kingside and giving his pieces more mobility. The worst of the position is now behind him. A funny line could have been rg4, followed by kxg4 and bd3. Botvinnik plays g4+, a move made in time trouble, forcing Tal's king to move. Tal retreats his king to kg6, staying safe and avoiding further checks. Botvinnik plays rc2, bringing his rook to a more active square. Tal brings his rook to rh8, eyeing Botvinnik's kingside and preparing to create threats. Botvinnik plays bd3+, checking Tal's king and forcing it to move. Tal retreats his king to kf6, bringing it to safety and connecting his rooks. Botvinnik brings his king to kg3, centralizing it and preparing to support his pawns. Tal plays re8, bringing his other rook into the game and adding pressure to the e-file. Botvinnik moves his bishop to bb5, putting pressure on Tal's queenside. Tal plays re4, centralizing his rook and attacking Botvinnik's pawn. Botvinnik responds with rc4, defending his pawn and offering a rook exchange. Tal accepts the exchange with rxc4, simplifying the position further. Botvinnik recaptures with bxc4, now with no more b4 advances possible for Tal, the position is becoming clearer. Tal brings his king to q7, centralizing it and preparing for the final phase of the endgame. Botvinnik plays ba4, placing his bishop on an active diagonal. Tal plays b5+, a tempting move to open lines for his f-pawn. Had he played f4, bf6 would follow. Botvinnik moves his king to kf3, bringing it to safety and supporting his pawns. Tal plays rh4, bringing his rook to an active square. Trying bc2 would be met by rh3+ and q4. Botvinnik brings his rook to rg1, defending his g-pawn and preparing for further action. Tal pushes f5, creating a pawn chain and opening lines for his rook. At this point, Botvinnik suggests a draw, which is accepted, concluding a hard-fought battle.